Morning, everyone. Perek Gimel Mishna Vav. Quick introduction. There is, as we know, there are a number of separations that we have to make from the produce of our land in Eretz Yisrael. We have to make separations for the Kohen, for the Levi. And there is actually an order that the Torah mandates us to do it. What comes first, what comes second. So actually the first thing that we're supposed to be separating from our new produce of the year is what's called Bikurim. Bikurim are the first of the ripened fruits of the land that we designate them as Bikurim. They have to be brought to the Beis HaMikdash, where we bring it to the Beis HaMikdash. We make a special Thanksgiving declaration for the fruits for the land of Eretz Yisrael, and then they go to the Kohen. So the order of what we have to separate goes: Bikurim is first. Truma Gedola means the Truma, the separation for the Kohen. Meiser Rishon, the first tenth, which goes to the Levi. Meiser Sheni, the second tenth, which the second tenth is either taken to Yerushalayim to eat. That is done in the that's done during the first, second, and second years of the Shemitah cycle. The second Meiser goes to, you have to take it to Yerushalayim. When it comes to the third year, the second Meiser goes to the poor. And again, that repeats itself. Fourth and fifth years goes to the second Meiser, you take it to Yerushalayim to eat. The sixth year, you give it to the poor person. The seventh year is Shemitah, where there are no Chumas and Meisers. And by Meiser Sheni, where the second tithing, we say, goes, you have to take it to Yerushalayim, you either take the actual produce to Yerushalayim, or you can redeem it onto money and take that money and spend it on food and drink in Yerushalayim. But this is the order. There's a specific order that the Torah mandates to separate all these things. Our Mishnah discusses what happens if you go out of order. So the Mishnah reads, Hamakdim Truma leBikurim, one who separates Truma before Bikurim. Ma'aser Rishon leTruma, or he separates the first tenth before separating the Truma for the Kohen. Ma'aser Sheni leRishon, or he separates the second tenth before separating the first tenth, which goes to the Levi. Although that person has transgressed a Torah prohibition, Masha Asay Asay. What's done, it's done. It works. It's effective. Shenemar, as the pasuk states, and this pasuk is teaching us, how do we know that you're not allowed to go out of order? Turns out we don't know yet where the Torah tells us to do that, what the order should be. That's going to come later. But right now, we're getting the source for the prohibition against going out of order. Shenemar, as it states, which is translated as your fullness, and your dim'acha, which means your truma, you shall not delay. Your fullness refers to the bikurim, because the bikurim are brought when the fruits become full, when they start filling out, when they ripen. Similarly, ascha, your fullness refers to bikurim. Dim'acha refers to the truma. Dim'acha means your grain. So your grain means the truma. It would include trumas meiser too. It would include Meiser. And the point of the pasuk is that the pasuk is saying that your Malay Ascha, that your Bikurim and your Truma, you shall not delay. It doesn't just mean delay, not give them at all, but it also refers to delaying when one was supposed to go first and the other one, and you did the other one before it. You're delaying what was supposed to be earlier. So this is the prohibition that tells us that if you go out of order, you have transgressed the prohibition. Nonetheless, although the Torah mandates an order, and you're transgressing a Torah prohibition, if you go out of order, nonetheless, the order still works. Now, it's interesting to note is that when we say that it is effective, that it works, there are still some very big differences between going in order and going out of order. So, for instance, the Mishnah said, if you take the Meiser Rishon before you separate Truma, you separate Meiser for the Levi, before you separate Truma for the Kohen, so we say it works. The Meiser is a good Meiser. But there's a difference between if you do it in order or not, and that is that you have a pile of grain. You separate truma. You're supposed to separate truma. Then you separate the meiser for the Levi, the tenth for the Levi. Now, the truma that you separate is a separation for everything in this pile. It's a separation that works. It's truma for the meiser that's going to be separated and go to the Levi. It works for the meiser sheni for the second tenth. It works for what's going to remain yours regularly to eat. So if you keep the order of truma before meiser, then when you separate meiser, there's no need to separate truma from it. You have to separate. The Levi has an obligation to separate trumas meiser, a tenth from a tenth of his meiser. That's his obligation. But when the Levi gets his meiser, that's all he has to worry about. He has to only worry about the tenth of his tenth. Doesn't have to worry about the truma gedayla, the first truma that goes to the Kohen. That's supposed to go for the whole pile. He doesn't have to worry about that because when the truma was separated, the meiser rishon, right, that which was going to be meiser rishon in this pile, the truma was taken for it because part of the pile. But if it comes out that, let's say, you take the meiser before the truma. Now, we've learned previously, if you take meiser before truma, before the completion of the process of the grain, so the obligation of truma never took effect on this grain, you don't have to separate truma. You have to separate the first truma. The truma of the meiser that Levi is obligated to go ahead and separate, that he has to do. But the truma gedayla, the truma that's supposed to come from the pile, the whole pile, we have a source to learn that you're exempt when that happens. But if it happened after you completed the processing of the grain, so the truma, obligation for truma did take effect in this grain, and you went and you took the meiser for the Levi before the truma for the Kohen, that meiser that was separated for the Levi, the truma gedayla, the first truma, was never separated for it because it was separated before the truma was separated. And in that situation, the Levi is going to have to separate truma gedayla, the first truma for his meiser, besides for the tenth of a tenth it has to give to the Kohen. That's because, so although it went going out of order, affected meiser, but there's a big difference between if you kept in order or get out of order. The same thing applies in the case where you take the meiser sheni, the second tenth before the first tenth. Typically, if you take the first tenth before the second, then the meiser rishon, the first tenth, is separated for everything that's left in this grain. After you take the truma, you separate the meiser, and the meiser separation for everything that's in this pile of grain. But if you take the meiser rishon before the meiser sheni, then that means that when you separated meiser the first tenth, the meiser sheni wasn't part of the pile, and therefore that first tenth was not taken for it. And therefore, from that meiser rishon, you're going to have to separate a tenth of it in order to fulfill the obligation of meiser rishon that goes to the Levi. So although it's effective, there is a difference. Another point that I want to mention is that there's a very interesting question that is asked, and that is that we talk about a case of separating truma before you separate bikurim. Right. You separated truma before you separated bikurim. Now, there is a problem, and that is that bikurim is actually separated while it's still connected to the ground. That's when you're supposed to separate bikurim. The Mishna bikurim in Masechta bikurim says you walk into the field, you see the ripened fruit, you tie a string around it, designated as truma, as bikurim, and that's how you do it. Bikurim is designated while it's still connected to the ground. Truma, on the other hand, you cannot designate truma for something connected to the ground. It doesn't work. So how, the question is it possible to separate truma for bikurim? Bikurim is separated when it's connected to the ground, and you can't separate truma when it's connected to the ground. And the answer is because by bikurim, I'm supposed to separate it when it's connected to the ground, but if I didn't, I harvested the produce, and I didn't separate bikurim. I separated bikurim from the harvested grain. Well, at that point of time, I could separate truma too. So in a case where I harvested the grain before I separated bikurim, I'm supposed to take the bikurim before the truma. But if I took the truma before the bikurim, then the halacha is going to be that the truma still works. And one last point of the Mishnah, and that is that the Mishnah concludes by showing us the prohibition of going out of order, which means if you go out of order, you transgress the prohibition. When we learn the sources that teach us of what the order is supposed to be, at that point, the Torah is also putting upon us a positive commandment, the mitzvahs aseh, to keep the order. So if I don't keep the order, I am disobeying a positive commandment, and I'm transgressing a negative commandment, a prohibition. Okay, Sefer HaMitzvot. So here the Chavetz Chaim puts three mitzvahs all together because they deal with this pretty much the same mitzvah, the same law, same halacha. And that is, there's something called chadash. There's a prohibition to eat from the new grain. What is not permitted, the Torah forbids us to eat from the new grain, before the carbon omer is brought. The carbon omer was a carbon mincha, meal offering brought from the barley that had just ripened. It's brought on the second day of Pesach, and once that is brought, one may eat from the new grain of that year. That's going to be produced that year. Before that, or anything that anything that grows after, that begins growing after that the bringing of the Omer, whatever grew before the Omer permits you to eat. Whatever grows after the Omer, now let it eat. That's called chadash. That's called the new grain. Now let it eat new grain. It has to be old. Old means that it was ready before the Pesach upon which you brought the carbon omer. So the Torah actually gives us three different prohibitions in regard to chadash, eating the new grain. Prohibition against eating bread made from the new grain before the omer was brought. Excuse me. It is a prohibition not to eat what's called koli. When we talk about the prohibition of yashin, we're talking about something produced from the five grains being wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. If the koli refers to kernels of any of the five grains that are roasted over a fire. So it's roasted kernels. And here again, it's prohibition to eat the roasted kernels mitfuah chadasha from the new grain before the omer is brought. And the third prohibition is mitzvahs leisasher lechol carmel, prohibition against eating carmel. Carmel refers to the fact that what you did is you took the kernels, you crushed them by hand, but you didn't roast them over the fire. And people eat them. So you cannot eat carmel from the new grain before the omer is brought. Shenemar, as the pasuk states, v'lechem v'kali v'charmel. All these three things we just mentioned: the bread, the roasted kernels, or the crushed kernels. You shall not eat until this very day. This very day means the second day of Pesach, upon when the carbon omer is brought. These prohibitions only apply to the five grains. And the five grains are chitim, wheat, sa'irim, barley, kusmin, spelt, shmuel, oats, v'shifa, and rye. Aser, all these are forbidden. If anybody eats a kazayis from any one of these things, if somebody who eats a kazayis, right? If someone eats a kazayis of each one, you have transgressed three prohibitions. Each one is a separate prohibition. Eating the kazayis of Amman Aleph from each one is its own prohibition. Eating a kazayis from each three means three transgressions. When we had the Beis Hamikdash, on the 16th day of Nisan, it was forbidden to eat from the new grain until the Omer carbon was brought. And without the Beis Hamikdash existing, when Beis Hamikdash is not existing, the entire 16th day of Nisan is forbidden from the Torah. After the 16th day, it's permissible. And outside of Eretz Yisrael, where there are 2 days of Yantif, where we do 2 days of Yantif, rabbinically, it's going to be forbidden the entire 7th day, the 17th day. The second day of Pesach, the third, right, because the 17th of Nisan, which is what we call the 17th day of Nisan, right? Because we keep 2 days of Yontif, which means we always have a question if the first day, meaning is the 16th, or either the 15th, and the 17th, the 16th. Being that we deal with that kind of question, that's why we keep 2 days of Yontif, because is it really again, let's talk about Pesach. Pesach is the 15th day of Nisan. But if we have a called Sveik Diyam, we have a doubt in the day, we don't know. Is it the 15th day, or is it really the 14th day? And is the next day really the 15th day? So you have to keep both days of Yontif. So now when it comes to the prohibition of Chadash, of the new grain, which the Torah tells us to keep it on the 16th day, well, outside of Eretz Yisrael, where we always have what's called Sveika Diyam, the question of the day. So on the 16th, is the 16th really the 15th? And the 17th really the 16th. Therefore, on the 17th day, it's also going to be forbidden. And the point is that without the Omer carbon, it's the day itself that you have to wait for in order to become permitted to eat from the new grain. Any kind of grain that took root before the Omer sacrifice was brought, even though it became fully complete, even though it ripened after the Omer, the Omer works for it. As long as it took root before the Omer, even though it ripens after the Omer sacrifice permits it because it took root beforehand. So when it grows later, it's going to be permissible. The Chavetz Chaim says this prohibition of Chadash applies in all places at all times. By women. Now, this next paragraph is very relevant because based on what we just said, the prohibition, what we just read, the prohibition of Chadash applies everywhere, inside Eretz Yisrael, outside of Eretz Yisrael, with the Beis HaMikdash, without a Beis HaMikdash. The Yesh Marishanim Nesvirlahu. The Chadash b'chutz la'aretz eno elamid rabbanan mishum gezerah. There are those of the Rishonim, the early authorities, who hold prohibition of Chadash outside of Eretz Yisrael is not mandated by the Torah. It's rabbinically mandated mishum gezerah as a decree, so as not to confuse what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. Like if you could eat it outside of Eretz Yisrael, you may come to eat it inside of Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, since it's a rabbinic decree, it's a rabbinic safeguard, these Rishonim, these opinions hold. This decree was only made in the places close to Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, from this came the practice that most people outside of Eretz Yisrael are not careful when it comes to this prohibition of Yashan. They don't keep it. They don't have a problem. They don't have an issue of Yashan outside of Eretz Yisrael, at least not near Eretz Yisrael, because of these opinions that say that the prohibition of Yashan, Chadash, outside of Eretz Yisrael is a rabbinic decree, which was only decreed for the areas close to Eretz Yisrael. Chavetz Chaim says, although we do not have the power to protest those who are lenient, nonetheless, anybody who is scrupulous in his observance of mitzvahs should be stringent and keep the prohibition of Chadash as much as it's possible for him to do. Because according to many of the early according to many of the great early authorities, who isser d'oraisa b'chol gavni, it's a tar prohibition everywhere. So therefore, you find people nowadays who are strict when it comes to the prohibition of Chadash, and they have to keep track of the grains and the flowers as to whether they are whether they're considered new or old, and others are more lenient regarding it. Have a great day.